Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast. This is episode number 25. As always, I am your co-host, Dr. David Noe. I'm here with my good friend, Jeff Winkle. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great. How about you, Dave?
Real well. We're here in the vomitorium, situated by the lake in Grand Rapids, and the weather still continues to be nasty, doesn't it?
Yes. Winter showing no signs of letting up. Ice dams on roofs.
Snow. Hatchet weather, we could say.
It is hatchet, ice-breaking weather, absolutely.
Right. But we have a very special guest today, don't we, Jeff?
We do.
A treat for our listeners.
Yes. Well, you going to tell us who that guest is?
So we are very pleased to welcome the actual first live guest here in the studios, and this is our good friend and colleague, Gary Schmidt. Gary, how are you this afternoon?
Good. I've been the one with the hatchet lately, who's on the roof, which is what we're referring to.
That's right.
But I am good. It's nice to be warm.
So we're very glad to have you here, Gary. Gary is a New York Times best-selling children's author. He's the author of many wonderful, really interesting books. Jeff, you've read some of those, haven't you?
I have three young boys, and they all love your books. I just finished reading Wednesday Wars with my middle son, and it was great. Yeah, he loved it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely brilliant books. I've been reading lately to try to prepare for this, and read Trouble and Okay for Now. Okay for Now was the funniest, easily, to my mind. Trouble was the most moving. But Gary, we're real glad to have you here this afternoon.
Oh, it's great to be on episode 25.
Yes.
It's like a cool milestone.
It is a landmark episode, yeah.
This is the silver.
Yeah, I didn't think we'd get past 3 episodes.
So as we get started, we want to give our usual shout out to one of our loyal listeners, and this one goes to Mrs. Kathy Meether, who is listening in Oviedo, Florida.
Oh, excellent. And do you know Kathy personally?
Yes, Kathy's a close personal friend, and it was she who actually turned me on to Gary's books. You'd think, being his colleague here in the same area, I would have done my homework.
What's wrong with you?
Many things, but the episode is only 45 minutes, so we're going to have to not talk about all that.
Yeah.
I was just down in Oviedo 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wonderful.
It was warm.
Yes.
It was really quite sweet.
Yeah, it's a really nice. And Kathy said you got to check out these books. They're just so poignant, and I like a poignant book, so... Hello, Kathy. Thanks for listening, and thanks to all our other listeners.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. All right, let's get into things. So Gary, as we were talking just before we hit the record button, one of the things that we'd love to hear from you is how or if kind of the role of the classics, or what of the classics you were maybe drawn to as a kid, and how that has influenced your own career as a writer and as a teacher. And I mean, that's a huge, broad question, but yeah.
I suppose we're defining classics as Western, or how we define?
Both David and I are classicists, so we're kind of using kind of the academic definition of kind of the Greco-Roman classics.
Sure.
And we're happy to make that definition broader, but just in terms of what we know the most about and can share with the audience, the Greco-Roman classics.
Yeah. Perhaps this is surprising, but I actually remember really vividly first reading Iliad and the Odyssey. They were Penguin classics, those editions. So I don't even know who the translator was now. I can remember that the Iliad was frustrating because somehow the binding broke halfway through, and all the last 150 pages were loose. So I was turning over one page at a time. I remember being determined to get through it. There was this one summer, I was probably end of middle school or beginning of high school, where I decided that I wanted to read several series. So that was the first, Lord of the Rings was second, and Dante was third. And I thought that would be really quite an amazing thing to finish all those. On the Iliad, I just sort of plowed through it. I remember not liking it all that much. Not liking the characters. And I thought that I should like Achilles, and I didn't. I just didn't like him. And didn't really connect with him, which is obvious now, right? I mean, he's just sort of a jerk at times.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then I got to Odyssey, and that was fantastic. And I thought that when I look back on that, I think it has to do with the structure. So that you have this journey motif, which lasts, the 10 years? 10 years?
These 10 years at war, and then 10 years back home.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that journey from Troy back home, was so interesting, and it was so organized in a sense, and I love that. And I didn't find that in the Iliad, but I really did find that in this one. And that was important for me. And to go from that then to Lord of the Rings, which I really read because I liked this girl in class, and she had read it 7 times, and I thought, okay. And which I got over my parents' objections, because in a bookstore, it was in an area labeled adult fantasy, and my parents thought it was porn.
That sounds really off-putting, doesn't it?
It really does. And if you remember, those old paperback editions were kind of strange in the illustrations. Sure. But to go from Odyssey, where you got that long journey motif, then to go to Lord of the Rings with a very similar set of journeys, that was pretty enlightening. And then I went to Dante. Loved Inferno. I remember loving the Inferno. Okay with Purgatorio. Wasn't interested at all in Paradise. Just didn't enjoy that one. But again, it's the same idea of a motif. And I do think that has probably influenced me, though I haven't done a sort of journey, a big epic journey at all ever as a writer. It does seem to me that the journeys that I want to put into the books are epic, but they're interior journeys.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed that.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm trying to do in just about all the books. Is that a direct one-to-one correspondence? I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but I do remember that summer really vividly, going through all those texts.
That's really interesting. I mean, that you came to them on your own. They weren't pounded into you from teacher to student.
Well, except for Lorraine, who was reading Lord of the Rings, and I had to read
yes, right.
So she provided the external incentive.
Yes, right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was not something through school or through classes or even an adult sort of supervisor or mentor. It was just those are the 3 kind of series that I wanted to maybe conquer. Maybe that's not the right word, but certainly read through.
Yeah.
So you've been not only a writer for many years, but like ourselves, a teacher. Have you ever taught the Iliad in the classroom?
Never have.
No.
I've never done that.
Okay.
Boy, now that you say that, that's what, because there's a new edition out that's recently. Now that you say that does sound sort of challenging.
Well, I wonder if you would have I'm only asking because I'm wondering if you'd have a different perspective. Yeah. One of the really interesting things about Homer that Aristotle mentions, we've said it on air many times, is the Odyssey was written when Homer was an old man, and the Iliad was written when he was a young man. And so I just wonder if there's a change in one's appreciation of literature over time, a change significant enough that one would like something that wasn't appealing at first.
Oh, absolutely, that's possible. I think I would, if I reread Dante and tried to teach that, I think that would be easier for me and more delightful. I think I would like Paradise a little bit more. That's a good point.
Are there texts that you've taught throughout your career that, if you look back, you appreciate them more, or you're just dead sick of them? As you kind of look back, your interpretation has changed as you've gotten older?
Yeah. The one that I'm tired of and that I probably won't teach again for a while is King Lear.
Really?
Sort of done with it. It's so unrelieved all the way through, and you get to the end, and he walks in with the dead body of Cordelia, and you just go, okay. Let's go home and have some soup or something.
So when you say unrelieved, you mean the tension and the characters, they feel unresolved? Is that
the
equivalent?
decline.
Okay.
The decline. Every scene is a movement downward, until you literally have a movement down to death. And he has to pick her up. He comes in with her body. That it just feels like that is every single time. Even the fool, when he gives his funny lines, even those have a kind of macabre quality to them that I'm just, okay, I've done it for a long time. I think I can live without teaching that one. The flip side is actually Genesis. I taught a course recently where we were looking at the literary genres, and we framed that through reading through Genesis. And there's this translation and notes by Robert Alter that is, so you know this one.
I've been reading him lately, actually.
It is out of this world, isn't it?
It's incredible,
It's an extraordinary...
The art of biblical narrative.
Incredible. And when you read through it, when you read the text, you don't know, you're not sure if you should read the text of Genesis or you should read the footnotes beneath it.
Right.
Because they're equally fascinating. It felt like I was reading it for the first time. It was, and I haven't had that experience in a very long time. So I've now read all of his translations in the Pentateuch, and he's got the Psalms out. History books are out, I think. But I find them fascinating. So that's the sort of newer one. As a kid, you read through it from the very get-go, right?
Right.
And so the stories are so familiar. But when you reread them now, or at least in his translation, you really do feel like, oh, I'm encountering them in a completely different way, with his focus on linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give an example, like something just from Genesis that really struck you as like you had not
The
seen
whole
it that way
business,
before?
and I know others know this, but the whole meaning of Adam, the fact that this is not necessarily a masculine individual figure, but that is in fact a human being, which he really works at hard. He also looks at a number of hard things to reconcile. So, for example, in his translation of is this Samuel or Kings, he talks about the Goliath story, which is fascinating, but then shows the second version of that. There are two versions of the same story. And, Baptist kid growing up, there's a way of looking at Scripture which means to me that, it has to be infallible, right? As a kid growing up. And suddenly you look at this text and you see, well, something's off here. There's two different versions of the very same story. In one, David is prominent, and the other, he isn't. How do I reconcile those two things? And when I was a kid growing up, it was Schofield Bible and a clear note there that says, well, this is another Goliath, he might be a cousin, or something like that. But obviously, even as a kid, I'm like, really? He has a cousin? But then Alter talks about, well, these are clearly two stories, or two versions of the same story, one of which has been given over to David. Perhaps, he says, because that elevates David as in terms of a heroic figure. So it may never have been the case that David, perhaps in the original versions of those stories, David may be completely irrelevant to that. That really interests me.
Does he talk about like an oral tradition and
which is exactly what he says.
Okay.
There is a sort of a version out there, or that existed at one point, now long gone, probably oral.
But he's skeptical of it in a way that's healthy, I think.
Absolutely.
I just read his Art of Biblical Narrative. A friend, a classicist, recommended it to me. I was really blown away by the depth of his insight. See, I've been following Augustine for a long time, who's making apologies for the Gospels because they're written at a low level, right?
Oh, really?
The style of the Gospels in Greek is very low, and in Augustine's time, people complained, why should I read the Gospels? It's when I can read good literature. And Augustine's comment was typically, well, it's written that way to humble you. You have to get on your knees to approach it. And I still think that that's legitimate, but I now have kind of repented of how quickly I have dismissed some of the aspects of the style in Genesis in particular. These are really complicated, brilliantly crafted stories. I had no idea.
Right. Even the way he leaves out the article, for example, in the King James, you would say something like, so it wasn't this was the first day or something, the creation story or whatever. But with Alter, and I can't remember it exactly, but he leaves out the. So it isn't the first day, it is first day. It is second day, it is third day. And gives a good explanation, which I can't pull up right now. But even reading it that way, you suddenly see there is a style here that I knew nothing about.
Right.
And putting that style onto it, or looking at that text through that lens, changes so much and makes you see it in a different way.
When I teach the Greco-Roman classics in translation, just that constant reminder of translation is not the thing itself. We're in the middle of doing an extended series on the Odyssey. One of the things we've talked a lot about is, once you understand kind of what Odysseus' name means or what Eumaeus means, it just adds a whole layer to it.
Sure.
So like knowing Hebrew is like, you just miss this whole
miss
other.
it all.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
So with the Odyssey, Gary, one thing that I really noticed about your book and enjoyed about all the books is the way that you frame the action. The action is well framed with mundane human activities. And so when I first encountered the Odyssey in grad school, my professor, Jack Holtzmark, said, it's a domestic epic. Every 20 lines, someone is either weeping or eating. And these are the fundamental aspects of human life. So in Pay Attention, Carter Jones, there's a lot of eating, there's a lot of scenes. And I think it's in Trouble, a lot of description of the weather, the changing weather patterns and so forth. And it would be easy to say, no, that's just filler, to the action. But it doesn't have that effect if you're really patient with it. I think it sets the novel up completely.
Yeah, I hope so. It's in Trouble, it was something of a joke, actually. You're supposed to start in the middle of things for a particularly young adult novel. So you have to have action. That's the sort of general rule of it.
Okay.
So there's got to be some engagement, some big deal, some movement, whatever it is going to bring you right into the story. That's the kind of general rule out there. Trouble starts with about a dozen pages of description.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on with that description. And no kidding, that was truly as a joke. I sent it to the editor. I knew her name is Virginia Buckley. I absolutely knew she was going to cut it all because she was the one who was just so rigorous about that kind of an opening. And so it was a complete joke. It's the manor house, it's the coast, it's all this past history. And I thought, okay, we'll start at the beginning of chapter 2 and it'll just be a laugh with Virginia. But she liked it. And so it remained. I really did not think that she would have let it remain. But it works, I guess. And it does set up the coast and the past history and the nature of that house, which is almost a character in the book. Or I think of it as a character in the book.
Definitely. And I think that book, well, I may not be remembering the right one. I better be careful here because I read the very famous line, this is a spoiler alert, right before the woman dies and the organist, when he's playing the organ. That's in Lizzie Bright.
That's Lizzie Bright.
Yeah, that's in Lizzie Bright. And that's the one where the breeze, right? The breeze plays the constant role of almost a narrator, it seems.
And is meant to be the breath of God. And I meant it in a very Hebrew sense, that, which is generally a female version, where there's this real presence. And in the book, it starts out as a very playful presence, so almost like a dog. Playing with him in the hall, for example, when he goes into Mrs. Cobb's house and whirling around, but it's just playful, but it's still there. He's still aware of it. As the book progresses, I hope, that gets more and more serious until at the end, when he again senses that sea breeze, it's a very serious moment, a really turning point moment for Turner. And of course, that's very subtle. It goes beneath the level of consciousness, I suspect. I'm not sure how many readers, particularly young readers, would say, oh, yeah, and in the Jewish tradition, this is the way the breath of God works, and so look at what he's doing there. Probably not. But for me as a writer, it changes how I use it, how I use that particular motif.
Now, one of the things that when David and I were talking about doing this episode with you was we talked about in many of your books, there's often a thread that kind of calls the reader back to something. There's some core. Baseball shows up a lot in the Wednesday Wars, which I just finished with my son, Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just kind of talk about, when you're thinking about writing a new book, is that something you kind of start with, this is going to be a hook and I'm going to build it around that, or is it more organic than that?
I think both of those are sort of true. I have to find that hook, that thread that goes through the book as I start to write it. So right now, for example, I'm working on a manuscript in which a kiddo has lost his parents at the beginning and has to find his way back into trust. I mean, if you can't trust that your parents are going to be there tomorrow, then what do you trust? And he has a really wonderful teacher who's actually Danny Hupfer from Wednesday Wars. That's a generation later. And he's smart, this teacher. And he knows that this kid needs something that is consistent and solid through the course of this year after his parents have passed away. So in his class, he is actually working with the Greek myths, and he assigns each kid a year-long project. The project that he assigns to my kid, whose name is Hercules, his brother's Achilles, is fun.
Whom you still don't like.
Whom I still don't like.
For the record.
I know, right.
Okay.
But it's the task that he assigns are the Labors of Hercules.
Yeah.
And he wants him to recast those and perform those in the modern world. So to take, the Nemean lion, which is caught, and how is he going to perform that in the modern world? And it gives him a kind of consistency. It also, as the stories go on, like with the Hydra, Hercules has to depend upon his nephew.
Right.
Yes.
He can't do it alone.
Euleus.
And so you have that story, the notion that this kid has to depend on other kids to trust other kids in this case. And each one of those labors, I hope, when this is all done, will then lead to the point where you are, where he's learning, he's growing throughout the course of this enactment. And each one is followed by he has to write a 150-word reflection, which is really fun to do, to write into a sixth grade or seventh grade voice.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And, to write, it's not just the oral voice, but the written voice in the seventh grade.
Yes.
And then it's followed by the comment from the teacher, from Danny Hupfer, about how he's doing that. And that gives me the whole structure of the book. I've got 12 labors. I know I've got 9 months. I know where he lives. He lives on Truro on Cape Cod. I know that he is hurting at the front end, and that this is about healing, and that he's got this mentor teacher who's doing this specifically, aiming at him to try and heal. So that kind of came early. Some of them came later, and some would get dropped. So in there's one called Just Like That, which was going to be all about music and the harp specifically. So Merrill Lee's book. Merrill Lee was going to learn how to play the harp, and which was hysterically funny. It's such a funny instrument, right? I mean, it's so big, and you can do funny things, but you can have her fall back with it, and on and on.
Imagine just the comedy of having to haul that thing
just
around.
Hold it. Exactly, exactly. But that all got cut. The whole thing got cut. I worked on it forever, and went to people to show me how to play the harp. And
so you're really doing a lot of research there.
I was, and it just didn't work. It just felt dumb. It just wasn't working at all.
Well, the Autobahn. Not to interrupt you, but the Autobahn, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. In part because it's very unusual to most people's experience.
Absolutely.
And even more unusual was cricket. It'd pay attention Carter Jones, and I'm thinking, oh, Gary, I don't know, cricket? Can you pull that off? But
do you know, I remember seeing, I suppose I was in college, an old version of this Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It was a film. And then bought the book afterwards. And the whole film, I don't think anyone has ever seen that lately. It must have been in the 30s, or I guess 30s. Anyway, in that film, there's a scene, and in the book, a scene when Mr. Chips, who is not enjoyed as a teacher, he's just a terrible, terrible classics teacher. All the kids give him a hard time. It's just really awful. He then goes out one afternoon when the kids are playing cricket, and he takes the bat. And everyone thinks, really, this is going to be a joke. Well, he turns out to be amazing. He's amazing. And that turns his relationship with those kids around. I've never forgotten that. It just struck me as so interesting. So that was it's also a challenge, right? I had no idea how to do it.
Sure.
And then to convey it to an American audience.
Right.
And I was super fortunate that there was, the book was published in New York and in London simultaneously. So there was a British editor, and she had a 15-year-old boy who plays cricket. So she was fantastic, correcting me and changing some of the terminology and all of that. It was really helpful. But I often try and find that thing that's going to take me through the whole book, that creates a structure that will help me, and then I can play with the notion of, how does this kiddo change over the course of this? So in Trouble, it's the journey up to Katahdin. That does that.
Yes. Yeah, I enjoyed that so much.
The Hercules, that sounds, as a classicist, that sounds fabulous, right?
It's like
it's fun.
Right?
It's super fun. And there's a problem that a lot of them are a lot alike. Like he gets the golden deer, he gets the lion, he gets the boar, and blah, blah, blah. But I have to find ways that are interesting in the story that I can then develop into something that will connect with him. Plus, obviously, I have to figure out how you're going to take the Hydra and reenact that in today's world.
And having to write a report is like Hercules had to prove these things to Eurystheus, right? He always had to show this guy.
Right. Or just, bring the boar, for example, into show him. Yeah. There has to be all of that.
And some of those scenes where he's carrying back the Erymanthian boar, in some of them, he's lowering the boar down into the amphora, in which Eurystheus
has this giant jar to hide from these, because he's terrified of what he's going to bring through next.
The boar is going snout first, and in others, the boar is going the other way first.
Both ends are terrifying.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. So, I've been long fascinated by Hercules because he's one of those rare characters in Greek myth that can straddle the world of comedy and tragedy so well, right? And he's also a deeply human character in terms of he's that kind of Sophoclean notion of suffering into truth. And Heracles, a lot of his heroism, a lot of his relatability is the way that he suffers. And he does these labors to expiate his guilt, not to really gain a kingdom or a throne or a glory. It's to get the blood guilt of murder off of him. It just makes it just a unique new character.
I think what's also what I'm finding is what are the links between them? So here's Labor 4, Labor 5. Does it matter that he's done Labor 4 as you approach Labor 5?
Yeah.
And there are times it does seem to. So there's going after the golden hind there. It takes him a year.
Right.
It's a whole year before he gets it.
The
next one is the boar. The next one is the boar, which before he scares out of the cave, he makes sure that there's a big snowbank over here.
Yes.
And so he scares him out, presses him against the snowbank, and got him. And you have to think, okay, he is not going to go for another year.
So I'm not spending a year
right?
going after this pig. Right.
Yeah.
And there are also other harder questions. Why is it that sometimes the gods are there to help him? I mean, at the beginning you get Apollo who gives him a bow, Athena gives him a robe, Vulcan gives him a breastplate. And there are moments, for example, with the carnivorous birds.
Stymphalides.
Where they help them. You know, Vulcan gives him brass rattles to scare the birds up, and Athena brings those rattles to him. So why does he get help then? But why doesn't he get help at some of the other ones?
Yeah.
And you know, that's any person of faith has to ask, well, why does God show up now, but doesn't show up here? And of course, in the book, this kid is quite right to ask, you know, why didn't God show up when my parents needed him most?
Yeah.
And that's a sort of deeper question that goes beneath it. And I think those labors sort of are helping me, I hope. We'll see how the book turns out in terms of asking that question in a way that's engaging for a middle school reader.
Right.
I'm eager to see what you're going to do with the Augean stables, because that is my favorite.
You know, he breaks down the wall, he directs two into it, 2 rivers into it, and there's the whole problem, it has to be done in a single day.
Yes. And he shows unusual intelligence for the character of Hercules.
Yeah.
He's mostly brute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here there's some real brains.
But then he
involved.
takes payment for it, and so it doesn't count. That's
right.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't get payment.
He's supposed to get all the cattle, but he gets half.
Well, and I don't know. How do you say the king's name is Augeas?
Aegeus.
Aegeus promises him 10% of all the cattle that he has, which are huge, right? But he sends his son in order to make sure as a witness, to make sure that Hercules does what he does. When Hercules finishes it in one day and the son, he comes back, then the king says essentially to him, wait a minute, this is one of your labors, so you should just do this for free.
Right.
Oh, right.
Hercules is really ticked, and the son stands up for Hercules.
Right.
After all the labors are done, Hercules goes back and he kills the king.
And puts the son on the throne.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right.
So there's a kind of, I'm not sure if I'm going to actually include much of that.
It would be difficult.
Novel. Yeah, it would be hard.
But you could do it.
But it is interesting. I mean, Hercules doesn't forget slights.
Right.
No.
He keeps them up.
That's part of
But
being
yeah,
a
it's
hero.
stable full of manure, funny.
Yeah.
Murder, not so funny.
Yeah. Well, and it is funny, right? Manure is always funny.
It's always funny.
course.
Exactly.
Always.
Wrestling with the 2 river gods, that's the one that always gets my students, right? How did he wrestle with the river gods? Well, look, you know, I'm not a biology professor. You gotta ask someone else. Just enjoy the story.
Right.
Enjoy the story.
So the Aeneid, this is in Lizzie Bright,
Right.
And of course, as I'm reading it, this is like my life as part of it. Why did you choose to cover that, and what was that experience like?
That was hard, actually. It's been a long time since I was serious about Latin, and I don't have any Greek. So I needed that story. I mean, one of the reasons I chose Aeneid was because it's Latin, and I wanted to have that connection with his father, who studies Latin. So that was a simple decision. Then after that, though, it was really, really hard to figure out how that's going to play out. So it's not just a thing that you throw in there.
Yeah.
So like the Audubon prints, I didn't want them just to be an illustration, but that there was some real connection to what's actually happening in the narrative. So it's connected. It's all one thing. And with that one, there is that scene of Aeneid leaving Troy and just deciding, well, what next?
Right.
What next? And sort of Turner is at that scene, at that moment when he is asking, what next? What's the next thing? Because what's happening to him was pretty awful.
Yeah.
He's just so unhappy at that.
Yeah. It was very artfully done. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much, the inclusion of the Aeneid there.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. The good people at Ratio have been helping to caffeinate the world for some years now with their aesthetically robust, dynamically effective line of premium coffee makers. Tara, why don't you tell our listeners how the Ratio machines work?
Well, it's quite simple, Jeff. Instead of having your precious brew trickle down through a plastic basket into some cheap glass carafe sitting on a hot old burner, the Ratio sends 200-degree Fahrenheit water soaring through a Fibonacci showerhead. It then sits in the bloom stage for a few minutes, allowing all of the harsh carbon dioxide to off-gas, depositing it into the hand-blown borosilicate glass or stainless steel carafe. Consistent, delicious coffee. No brackish tang.
So I understand that the ratio 8 is all sold out, but its little brother, the 6, at a more attainable price point, is still available in both black, matte, and white stainless.
That's right, so listen up, ad nauseates. Go to ratiocoffee.com right now and get a 15% exclusive discount on the Ratio 6. Between now and March 20th, 2021, go to ratiocoffee.com and enter special code ANCO for 15% off the Ratio 6. That's ANCO, ratiocoffee.com. Don't not check it out.
Today's episode also brought to you by Ad Astra Coffee Roasters of Hillsdale, Michigan.
That's right, Jeff. Ad Astra brews a delicious, I should say roast, you got to do your own brewing, a delicious cup of coffee. You got some in the mail recently, right?
I did. It was great stuff. We got 4 different bags of different roast, light, medium, and dark. Just great stuff.
They got the poetry series where each bag of coffee features a poem from people like Wordsworth and other great poets.
Yes, I did. I drank some Rilke this morning.
I had some too. Delicious in the cup, isn't it?
It is.
Fantastic. So what can the Ad Nauseam listeners do to lay their hands and palates on some of this coffee?
Well, Ad Nauseam listeners can go to adastraroasters.com, Ad Astra, A-D-A-S-T-R-A, roasters.com.
You mean they have a Latin name too?
They do. Yes, to the stars.
Yes, through the stars, through coffee. Ad Astra per Caffea.
Caffea, yes. So adastraroasters.com. Check out some of their delicious offerings, and as an Ad Nauseam listener, you get 10% off by entering the coupon code ANAA.
That's ANAA. Go to Ad Astra, A-D-A-S-T-R-A, roasters.com for 10% off. Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. Since 1972, Hackett Publishing has been an independent publisher of high-quality translations in the field of classics, as well as many other corners of the humanities.
Sophia Hackett's growing classic list includes hundreds of titles covering ancient history, literature, philosophy, political science, and classical language study.
Dr. Wrinkles, their classical lit catalog is loaded. Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, Metamorphoses, and do they have Herodotus, Sine Dubio? What about those Tiber dwellers? Anything on those toga-wearing folks?
Of course, Hackett has titles on ancient Rome too, with translations of Suetonius, Livy, and more.
I especially love the Hans Orberg series Lingua Latina per se illustrata.
Okay, AN crew, save 20% on any order and receive free shipping from Hackett Publishing. All you have to do is go to hackettpublishing.com. That's H-A-C-K-E-T-T publishing.com. Find the text you want. Enter AN2021 in the box, which asks for the coupon code. Don't hesitate. Check out hackettpublishing.com today. I got to share just a few of my memories of being your student. A couple of things that stuck out. One, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not remembering this right. One thing I remember you saying in class, or telling me specifically, is that your mom had Billy Joel as a student. Is that true?
She was in the high school that Billy Joel attended.
Okay.
Oh, so classmate.
So, no, she was a special ed teacher. Before there really were special ed teachers. My mother was a special ed teacher in the high school. And that meant that her time was really quite flexible. And she claims, and I hope this is true and not just a figment of her memory, but she claims that Billy Joel would leave classes or would cut classes and would go down to the auditorium and would then play, would play on the piano.
It's completely plausible.
It is plausible. It seems really likely, in fact.
Yeah.
I hope that that's true. But she says that she would go down and just listen.
Just listen to
this kid. I mean, you didn't know anything about him, but to this kid who's playing piano so artfully, and she couldn't believe it. My father was also a really good piano player, but he used to talk about having Baptist fingers to play hymns. And that's what he did, and he was really, really good at that.
Yeah.
But I think Billy Joel was not playing Baptist with Baptist fingers, and she just loved it. She loved it.
Oh, that's great. That memory was more or less on point.
I hope it's true.
Yeah. Now, another thing I remember from that class, and I'm hoping it to connect to our larger conversation here, is when I took the class, the subject that you were working on was hell mouths. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Did you work on hell mouths?
Yeah, the mouth of hell.
Yeah.
And Mostly in Middle English stuff.
Okay.
Middle English works.
Yeah.
And that book finally did get done. It was the dissertation and it's the pattern of so many, right? You finish your dissertation, you put it away for 5 years.
Yeah.
You go back and you write it, you see everything you said 5 years ago was wrong.
Right.
But you've had 5 years to reflect on it, and you've studied more, and that book got done, back in the early 90s,
okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. It was the way that we choose to embody that idea, hell, that we are eaten by something ferocious, something monstrous. And of course, Dante does the same thing. And it's amazing. It's an amazing image, and a really vivid image.
Yeah.
So that was an amazing time.
It made an impact on you, Jeff.
It did.
30 years on.
One of the things I'm working on is I'm fascinated with urban legends, American urban legends, and one of the things that you find across the country, there are these places that are purported to be entrances to hell. You find this the world over, and one of the concepts that I'm fascinated with is kind of the concept of kind of liminality, being stuck in this in-between place. And
you're going to bring out bridginess now?
I'm talking about, we're not going to go full bridginess.
Gefuhr's Moss.
But it struck me is that I wonder if that your young adult literature, middle school is amongst the most liminal times in our lives, right? And it's that you're not a kid, you're not an adult, and you're just kind of stuck in this in-between place. And I wonder if that the liminality of the hell mouth, the threshold experience, or is anything connect with you as you kind of think about your characters?
That's really interesting. I've never really thought about that, with one exception. But first, the liminality of middle school, or the middle school life, is absolutely right at the center of what I do. Yeah. Because if you're a middle school kid, you can be at one moment 10 years old and act like a 10-year-old, and then in a few minutes later, you're acting like you're 25. Yeah. The amazing sway back and forth in the age of middle school is so interesting and creates tremendous tension, right? Because you are, on the one moment, facing childhood with all of its safety, one hopes, with all of its safeties and home and all that. And then you're also facing adulthood with all of its responsibilities and moving towards individual responsibilities. That, to have those two things together, is so interesting. And because in our culture we don't really have a moment when someone says, now you are an adult. We don't have, maybe a driver's license is the closest we have to that.
Although a lot of kids today aren't getting them, apparently.
No, that's true.
It's changed. But
that's really, so what is it? What has to happen in a kiddo's life to help that person move on towards adulthood? What's the thing? Yeah. And in some ways, all of the books are me exploring that. What's the thing that has to happen in your life that enables you to go past the moment of looking back to childhood towards adulthood? Right. And we all know people who never make it. We all know people who make it very early. So there isn't something fixed. So what is it? Right. What has to happen?
Well, basically, the central character in Wednesday Wars, he's not one of the Catholics, and he's not Jewish. No. So he doesn't get a confirmation. He doesn't get a bar mitzvah. No. There's these moments that tell you that you are an adult, right?
That's exactly why he's there. Yes. Right? Exactly right. Yeah. Right? So what's the thing? And at the end, when he finally takes responsibility and says, I choose what it is to believe, and that is an adult moment. So when do you say, I choose to believe this in my faith tradition because I choose it, not because I'm inheriting it from my parents? Yes. That's a huge, huge step. Or even, I choose this vocation because I choose it. This is where I see my gifts. This is where I'm interested in what I'm interested in pursuing, not what do my parents want me to pursue. Those are huge moments in someone's life, and they are steps towards adulthood. Yeah.
So did you have tremendous compassion? I'm not asking you to brag, but the novels of yours that I've read, they seem to have a lot of compassion for the suffering of these liminal times in people's lives, to use Jeff's language, middle school. I don't find I'm an especially compassionate person by any stretch. So I wonder, did you have that sense when you began to write? Has your compassion grown through the experience, or what would you say? Or is it more technical and distant?
No, it isn't technical and distant. It is. I think I know a scene is working when I am feeling the emotions of the scene, particularly scenes of loss, or terrible disappointment, or maybe elation, or connection. If I'm feeling that emotion, if I'm crying when this happens, that tells me something is good. And I can't force it, right? You
Right.
can't manipulate. That's just a hack thing to do. But if you feel that because you're writing out of your guts and out of what you most deeply believe, then you're feeling, at least that's for me a sense that this is going, something true is happening here, I should say. And I don't think you could work, I mean, I go see a lot of middle schoolers. I go to about 40 or 50 schools a year.
Wow.
I don't think you can go to those places and meet those kids and get their letters and see some of the things that they say without feeling like, okay, these kids are under pressures we can hardly believe. I got a letter 2 days ago, and a young woman who had just read Pay Attention, and the letter was how every day my dad breaks me, and she just wrote that again and again, breaks me. I don't even know what that means, that my dad breaks me. But I mean, imagine saying that when you are, she's in 6th grade. And again and again, those letters that come that are filled with pain. And we can all remember middle school as a difficult time. Everything is changing. And so it is, of course, difficult. But it's quite stunning to see, to get those letters or to meet kids. To go to a prison, and it's a prison for 8th grade boys.
Yeah.
They're 8th grade boys. And you just go, really? How could this possibly be that we in America have prisons for 8th grade boys? And I was in one where there were 20 kids or 40 kids in the facility. I was with 20 of them. Of those kids, none had seen a parent for months. For months. And it was way north, and distance may have something to do with it. But to not see your parents and you are in prison.
Yeah.
You know, what is it now? It's 3 o'clock. In an hour and a half, those boys will stand in front of a gate, and that gate will open. And you can't believe what that sounds like. And the kids will walk into those cells individually, and then the gate will slide across and will go click. And they're there till 6:30, 14 hours. And we do that in America. So yeah, I don't think you can work with this age group if you don't care about them. And I think teachers for middle schoolers would have to say that too, right? I mean, you often hear teachers will say something like, "Wow, that's the hardest group to work with."
Yeah.
You go see middle schoolers. I was at one visit where a principal said, "Oh man, these are middle schoolers. You know, if you want to stop after just a few minutes, fine." Wow. I was the principal, and they were great. They were fine. But I don't think you can work with that age group without having a sense that this is important. This is an important moment in their lives, and I get to be a part of that.
Yeah.
What a privilege.
And so this is part of Orbiting Jupiter, right?
Absolutely.
And you both told me a story this past summer that you met an individual whom who spoke to you. Maybe you don't want to talk about it on air, I don't know, but for whom it was very real experience, part of the story of the novel. And also, I would say it's the saddest of all the novels by far.
Yeah.
And other people have commented on that to me as well.
That was an 8th grade kiddo, and it was a school south of Chicago, and we were walking in. It was going to be 400 8th graders in a gym. That's a fun thing.
Oh my gosh.
And so as we're walking in, and of course they're all up, they're out of class, right? So 8th grade, you're out of class. That's pretty cool. We're all walking to the gym, and this one kid comes next to me, and he whispers in the middle of this crowded hall, but I could hear him, and he said, "You wrote my biography."
Oh man.
And he said, he's an 8th grade kid. He's been in juvie twice. The second time he was in juvie, his girlfriend, whom he had gotten pregnant, had an abortion. And she was an 8th grader too. And he said, "I wanted the child." He said, "I wanted the baby. But she had an abortion." And you look at this kid who then goes and sits in the front bleacher and who's just crying. And you're thinking, really? 14? You're 14 years old and you have these issues to deal with?
Unbelievable.
It's, yeah.
Do you ever, when you're writing and thinking about writing, do you think about, does the question, like, what can kids handle enter your mind? Like one of the authors that my boys love is Lemony Snicket, which is, can get pretty bleak, right? And if you like written a scene and you thought, that's too much.
Yeah, I do think about that a lot. And there's great stories about other writers who have fronted that. Robert Cormier, who's a devout Catholic writer, who was his most famous book is The Chocolate War. And there's a scene there that he wrote in which the sort of malevolent middle school kid, or high school kid, I guess, is trying to come up with a really, really terrible prank. I mean, not just funny, but really destructive and humiliating. And he's trying to come up with it in his room late at night. And he performs this sexual act on himself. And after Cormier writes it, he goes, no, I'm just not going to go there. And he just ends the whole thing. He just takes that whole scene and throws it away. And so it doesn't even appear in the book. I think of that a lot. Am I doing something in this book that will really be hurtful to a kid? Am I bringing up a topic that will be really hurtful for a kid? And on the other side, you do think not every book should be for every kid.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That, okay, there are some books, not every book is good for every adult.
Right.
Sure.
And so there will be some kids for Orbiting Jupiter who will really, really chime with that book, and there will be some kids who have no idea how to handle it. And okay, I guess that's sort of the way it is.
Yeah.
You make a choice on that. And there are kids. Well, I was in New York a while ago, and there were 4 classes of 8th graders I was meeting, and they'd all read Orbiting Jupiter.
Huh.
You cannot believe how angry they were at the ending of that book. I mean, really angry, to the point that for the 4th group, after 3 times getting yelled at, I finally said, okay, before we begin today, you do realize this is a novel, right?
Right.
This is a novel. I really didn't kill anyone.
Yes.
Okay, you get that. And they didn't care. They didn't care.
Well, I guess that's a testimony to the artistry, right? It's believable.
I hope so.
Right? They didn't just say, "Oh, it's make believe," and it really deeply impacted them. Can we talk about comedy for a little bit? I've really appreciated this, but
Sure.
One of the questions that I have when I was reading "Okay for Now," which is the funniest one by far, is do you have a difficult time stopping at points the comic scenes?
Oh.
Do you have the sense of, boy, this is really going well and this is funny? I would have a hard time refraining from drawing more humor out of the episode. But you have a wonderful alternation between serious and silly. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that alternation is our lives, right? I mean, there are days when something really crummy happens.
Yes.
And that's followed by something hysterically fun. I mean, we have classes like that, too,
Right.
where comedy and tragedy or pathos are just all mixed together. And, I mean, that's kind of how we live.
Mm-hmm.
We live with that all working out. And as adults, we're used to that pattern, and we can handle that sort of movement back and forth. The younger you go in writing, I think it's more and more difficult to do that, because it feels that that's not something that a kid can handle easily. But yeah, I want to show that this is what life is like. I don't think we live unrelievedly depressed on hopes, or unrelievedly happy and excited. I mean, we are always going back and forth. Stopping is actually easier for me than you might imagine.
Okay.
I write 500 words a day on a project, and I stop. And I don't care how the horses are running. I'm done.
So that's
word
about 2
500.
pages, really.
It's really very short. It's a page and a half or so. But I always stop at 500 words. I mean, so many great American writers have done that. So Steinbeck, he writes a letter to his editor, writes 500 words and done. Hemingway, you can look at his manuscripts, and you know how when we were kids we put the number of, if you had to do 150
Right.
words or something, you put little words and the numbers next to it. He did that.
Is that
and
right?
he stops at 500. Jack London, who was our most prolific novelist, he wrote more than anyone else, 500 words a day.
Wow.
And so it feels like it's more about the consistency and discipline than it is about having really big days or short days in terms of productivity. So it's not hard for that, but comedy is wicked hard for me. It's really, really hard.
What do you think makes it difficult?
I
Because
wish I know.
I think you're an amusing person.
I think it's way harder to be funny than to be
What would
tragic.
you know about that, Jeff?
I just know I have a really difficult time being funny. My wife says so.
It can be corny, right?
Yeah.
It
Right.
can be lame. And again, if you're writing for a middle school audience, they are not going to put up with lame.
That's true.
So you want it to be funny. You want it to be organically funny so that it arises out of the real situations. Sometimes repetition works, where you have something which appears here, and then later on
Yep.
it comes here. And because it comes here, it's really funny.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but that means you have to really have a good handle on everything that you've written before. I find it very difficult.
Yeah.
So those passages are written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten again and again and again, so that the timing is right, so that you're not drawing it out, and again, so that it feels authentically funny.
Yeah, it seems seamless after the fact, but I'm sure there's a lot of spaghetti that goes into the process.
I saw some of the first drafts. You just go, oh my goodness.
But is it like what you were talking with the kind of the more tragic stuff? If you find yourself laughing, is it like a sign? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm onto it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier for me with the tragic stuff, oddly, than for the funny stuff. And sometimes there are things which you don't intend to be funny, which a kiddo will say, yeah, that's really funny. But yeah, there you just hope.
Yeah.
So Jeff, here'd be a good place to insert what you told me about Mrs. Winkle's view of humor. I think that's kind of apropos.
Oh yeah,
of the
you mentioned
conversation.
repetition, right? I think David and I are talking about this. I think there are, broadly speaking, there's masculine humor and feminine humor. And
Careful.
I know.
This is not going to go well.
With my guy friends, often repetition is key to the funny, right? And my wife's of the regard, you said it once, it was funny, don't say it again, right? She'll often just accuse me of using old material.
Sure.
But I was like, the repetition of it is what, in some ways, makes it funnier.
Who knows if this is going to be funny, but on this Hercules book, there's a scene early on where one of the kids is sort of challenging the teacher, who's ex-Marine. And he gives him this hard time about, well, do you think we should carry hatchets all the time? And this ex-Marine just gives a kind of snarky response to that, and everyone's kind of laughing at the snarky responses. It's not particularly funny, I don't think. But I've been working on chapter 9 this morning, and there's a scene where the kid suddenly realizes, dang it, I need a hatchet. and for me, that's really funny, so I'm laughing at that. But it all depends on whether the reader will remember what happened back in chapter 1.
Right, it's the grenade. You pull the pin, right? And then... Yeah, exactly.
And then absolutely.
That's great.
So Gary, I understand that you have a real strong interest in Charles Dickens.
Yes.
And,
indeed.
and so let's talk about him a little bit.
Okay, let's talk about
We're
it.
going to just give you the floor here, give you the stage.
Okay. Well, there's huge differences, right? Obviously. One of the things that Dickens is doing in this Victorian world of his is that his novels are about birth to death, pretty much, or birth to a very, very mature time. So you've got just about any of the novels to look at, and you're following someone whose lifespan is given to us. And often, as in so many Victorian novels, the books will end with that really short last chapter. So you've read, 7,000 pages, and suddenly in the last chapter you get the rest of the story that will take you all the way to the career. And I love that. But the difference is that when you're writing for a middle grade audience, you're taking a very, very small slice of that. So that I'm not showing birth to death. I'm showing just this one small time, maybe a year, or maybe a lot less than a year. And I have to fill in or suggest more than what Dickens can do, where he can expand. And Lord knows he expands a lot. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have a whole lot of time to talk about, in a book about a 13-year-old, say, I can't spend a huge amount of time talking about birth to age 12. I can suggest a lot and hit some highlights that I think are going to impact what happens in the book, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. So no Pip in the cemetery kind of stuff. Neither can I then say, all right, at the end of the book, here's the rest of the story, that it goes on and on and on, or show his adult life or the character's adult life. So I can only do this, and everything else has to be suggested. That, to me, is kind of an interesting challenge. So that when you end the book, I hope that you have a sense that, okay, because of these things that have happened this year, this character will be a certain kind of person.
Yes.
Or this character will be enabled, and I mean that in a good way, enabled to handle the things that are going to happen later on to him or to her. And that's very different from what a Victorian novel does.
That's really interesting.
On the other side of that, I really love what Dickens can do, particularly with child characters, because he loves particularly the downtrodden. He is really, really incredibly sensitive to the downtrodden of Victorian England. And the fact that he can show that empathy is a model to me. So in Bleak House, there's a scene when little Joe is, who's a street kid, who's a survivor. But now he's not. He's not going to survive this night. And there are two characters with him who are standing beside him, but they're helpless. They have no idea what to do. And he is quickly moving towards death. And it's a sentimental scene. I get it. And he starts to say the Lord's Prayer and doesn't quite make it until he finally dies. But he does die. And because Dickens is who he is, I mean, he could have just sentimentalized that on and on and on. But he actually stops the novel and he steps out. This is not a narrator anymore. It's Dickens himself. He steps out of the novel and he says to the reader, actually to more than the reader, he says, "Dead, Your Majesty." And he's talking to Victoria. He's literally talking to Victoria. "Dead, Your Majesty. Dead, Your Right Reverence, and you wrong reverence. Dead, your lords and ladies, and dying thus around us every day." That's an incredible passage. He's literally out of the novel saying, this is happening. This is happening to us. This is what our culture endures, it accepts.
Right.
Pay attention. Pay attention to it. I love that he's able to show that astonishing empathy. And I love, too, that he can be, I mean, you talked before about the sort of seriousness and pain of life mixed together with the humor of life. That's him. I mean, he can really show those sides. And I think the perfect example of that is Oliver Twist, where you come to the end of that book, and he just focuses on the childhood of that character. He's gone through hell. I mean, it's just been awful. He's also gone through paradise. He's had this moment, these few moments, few days with the person he doesn't even know is his great uncle yet, who loves him in a household that loves him, and then he's ripped away from that. Well, back and forth, and at the end of that, he finally is able to escape, the bad guys. He's able to escape the street life, and you know that he's going to be okay. But you also know, and I find this incredibly moving, this is why I love it, you also know that he's forever affected, that he will be a different person because he has spent time in the slums and the byways and in the alleys. He has spent time with people who are really, really struggling. He has spent time in starving. I mean, all that stuff is at play, and he is not going to forget it. So what's so cool is that when the first edition came out, and the first edition came out before all the serialized versions came out, there was a plate at the end, an illustration at the end, called the Fireside Plate.
This is the end of Oliver Twist?
Yeah, end of Oliver Twist. And that illustration showed Oliver with his great uncle and everyone around him, and they're all sitting by the fireside happy. And Dickens canceled it. It only appears in the first edition. He canceled that illustration. He does not want the conventional happy ending. I think that's guts.
Yeah.
So, and I try and do that as much as I can. I don't want it to be I don't want any novel to be a Hallmark card.
Yeah.
Because life isn't a Hallmark card.
No, but one really artful thing that you have done, which I notice, is that the characters make cameos in the various novels.
Yeah.
But it's subtle, it's inconspicuous, and so they're intra-referential, right? But you have to pay attention, but you can see a little bit, so-and-so is now a coach, and so-and-so is now in this adult position.
Yeah.
So it's a satisfying detail to know that the characters lived on, and I know that's deliberate, obviously, but it's well done.
And there's a pleasure in going, if you're working on this book, there's sort of a pleasure in revisiting a character from an earlier book, and to see, okay, here's how I see the rest of their lives, because you can only suggest it in the book itself. And to have a character who is, at the end of Okay for Now, you don't know what happens with Lil, and you don't know what happens with Doug. But if you read Pay Attention, Carter Jones, well, there's a character named Lil Swiatek.
Right.
And you know that her husband, Doug, has gone to Europe to study art. And, I mean, that's all that appears there, but you know the ending to the story.
Yeah, it's subtle and delightful. It's quite nice. It's like Homer writing Nestor into the Odyssey, right?
Yeah.
He's obnoxious a little bit in the Iliad, but he comes off better.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Slightly less obnoxious.
Okay.
Yeah. A doddering old man. Right?
Yeah.
Gary, I got to ask, the settings of your books reflect a kind of bitterness of having been stuck in Michigan for many years. I mean, clearly a love for the Northeast, and
sure.
But there are no tropical elements, right? in any of his books.
No.
Sunshine and beaches and.
Yeah, no. But I was just talking with a guy about wouldn't it be nice today, because it was -9 in Alto the other day. And I said to this guy, wouldn't it be nice, I don't know, down to Florida for a few days And he says, that state has nothing that I need. And I'm like, it's got warm weather. Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Citrus, sunshine.
But I do. I love New England.
Yeah.
My family has been there since 16-something. I don't know,
Wow.
just some crazy time. And the weirdness of it is that there are maps of Raleigh, Massachusetts from the 1600s. And there is the house of Hugh Smith, which is my mother's side. But just down the street is the house of Thomas Stickney, who is my wife's side. So they must have known each other. I mean, literally just a few houses apart.
That's crazy.
Which is just fun.
Yeah.
Just fun, huh?
That's
But
incredible.
you do. It's you sit in your study, and there's the border collie, and there's the Woodstock one over here, and you got your books around you, and St. Francis standing there, and all of that's really cool. I really like that, but it is a kind of isolating thing. You're kind of alone, and it's a long task. I mean, a book is going to take 2 years.
Right.
So there is a pleasure in putting yourself imaginatively in a setting that you really love. And so most of the books are in settings that I really, really love.
Yeah.
So, I mean, heading to Katahdin, obviously I
Yeah.
love the mountain there. And even in Orbiting Jupiter, that tie-up with the cows, I mean, I have milked cows in that tie-up. And there is just an enormous pleasure in remembering those cold mornings, milking Rosie.
Yeah.
And it's
And in First Boy, too, there's a lot
and
of...
First Boy, there's a whole
lot of
dairy
cow
farm,
milking.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of fun. I really just like that. And you're right. I'm not. I probably never will set a book in a setting I don't know at all. Like, say in Arkansas or something. But others will do that. And again, not every book is for everyone.
Right.
But that's sort of why.
Yeah.
I like
Well,
it.
should we wrap it up here then?
I think, let's wrap it up.
Well, we want to say a very heartfelt thank you, Gary, for
thank you.
coming out this afternoon.
Yeah, this has been
and,
fascinating. This has been a ton of fun.
it's been so enlightening, and we hope
I can't
that-
wait for the Hercules book. That sounds great.
We should
either.
probably talk about that one on air. Probably
Absolutely.
devote a whole
Yes.
episode to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I can't wait to tell my boys about it. They're gonna flip. That's great.
Let's do September 1.
September 1. Okay.
It's due to the publisher September 1.
Okay.
So it won't be out until the next year,
So we can expect it in 2022.
2022.
And you
Great.
told me before that you don't choose the titles always, or seldom.
I hardly ever.
So we don't.
Oh,
We don't
really?
really know what it's going to be.
Right now it's called The Labors of Hercules Beale.
Oh.
And Beale is taken from a London bookseller.
Huh.
He just sold me some really nice books, and I just wanted to. It just felt like the name was right. But I don't know. It might very well be that the house was saying, "No, forget that."
Right.
So I've only gotten a few titles of my own. Most of them are negotiated with the editor.
Well, that's fascinating. Something to look forward to. All right, Jeff. Well, we got to get out of here. The
We do.
vomitorium is booked again. Once again, I think it is a pancake and fish fry night.
Oh, again?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
man,
So they're beating at the door with their bottles of syrup and their.
they leave a stank.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
But we want to say to all of our listeners, thank you so much. We're recently passed a milestone, up over 7,500 downloads now.
It's great. Thank you so much for listening.
You people must have nothing to do with your time, that's all I can think. And we need to say thank you to our wonderful sound engineer, Mishka.
Mishka.
And to the guys that provide the intro and outro music, the generous, talented Ken Tamplin and Scott Van Zen. What if our listeners want to leave some feedback? Jeff, what should they do?
Well, they can contact either of us. If they have criticisms, they have ideas, they have praise, they can write to you at dave@odnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. Or to me at jeff@odnauseam.com.
And Jeff, didn't we promise that we would read on the air for episode 25? This is a packed episode, isn't it, with Gary?
We didn't promise that, did we?
I think we did.
Oh.
One of our many foolish promises.
Yes.
To read some of the reviews we've gotten. So let's have some of those.
Okay. All right. You want me to start?
Yeah,
Pick
go
one here?
ahead.
Thanks to the listeners. The vast majority of these are really nice to read and
They
very
are.
complimentary. Here's one that says, great fun and great range. These hosts have great conversational chemistry and a lot to impart. It's easy listening, but I've absorbed a good deal of interesting information. It takes the broadest outlook of what you can think about through the study of the classics.
Are they talking about us?
I guess so.
Okay.
Because some of these could be a mistake.
So this one is 5 stars. It's from Dr. Ed P. Homer would love it. Noe and Winkle, who could lecture on classics anywhere and before anyone, yeah, we try to do that, can also chat wonderfully for everyone on everything
Man.
classical.
Wow.
Quinque Stellae.
Man, fabulous.
We should probably read a negative one.
Well, I got another 5-star one here.
All right, let's hear it.
This one is from BD Locklear,
Okay.
who writes that this is the podcast that BD apparently has been waiting for. It's great to finally have a substantive podcast done by two scholars who advocate for the classics as a way of life. Dr. Noe and Dr. Winkle know their stuff, but their humor is the secret sauce for this great podcast.
That's really nice. I'm wondering once again, are they talking about us? I like this one. This one's quite funny. Brugled me senseless.
Yes.
From February 10. The classics with gusto. Dr. Noe and Dr. Winkle are learned. I think that's how that's pronounced, isn't it?
Learned?
Learned. Are learned enough to provide insightful commentary that is more, but not less, than a mere rehash of Wikipedia. Now, I'm ad-libbing here. While not sounding like you're sitting through a lecture, the topics can be like a large meal where you don't know where to start, but Ad Nauseam helps you acquire the tastes necessary to digest it in an incredibly palatable way.
Wow. I like the gustatory buy-in.
Yeah,
there.
They got that in there, didn't they?
That's great.
Very
yeah.
nicely done.
All right. Here's one that it's got 5 stars, but the content of the review is this is from Miccius Porcius.
Miccius Porcius?
Says this is a podcast for the ages, and then writes, if you like dad jokes and Homer, this is for you.
Oh, boy, that stings.
Oh, man, ouch.
Should we hang up our podcasting cleats at this point?
I mean, we're both dads.
Okay.
We both like jokes.
And we both like Homer.
That's right.
It's a threefer.
Thank you, Miccius.
Homogeneous Ice Cream. That's a funny title. But once again, 5 stars. Of course, this was way back in September of 2020.
Oh, we were just starting out.
Seems like a year ago.
It does.
What did Homogeneous Ice Cream say?
Homogeneous Ice Cream, you got that?
Oh, yes. I thought you were going to read it.
No, you got it.
Bingeable, exciting, informative, and funny. Although most bingeable podcasts don't typically reach back 4,000 years for their subject matter, Ad Nauseam deftly navigates this broad span. We are so deft.
We are.
Doctors Noe and Winkle bring a sense of humor, puns, and a dynamic back and forth to bring to life the joy of the classics. Come for the Spinal Tap references, stay for Polyphemus, Zinnia, and Cicero. A for these 2 professors.
Wow.
We could have written it ourselves.
Man.
Did we write this one ourselves?
You wrote that one, didn't
Okay,
you?
yeah,
Right.
maybe.
You wrote that. It was in August before we even started.
Yeah. How about one more before we wrap it up?
All right. I'll read this one. This is from Havel Havalim Amar Koheleth. Is that Klingon?
No. It's Hebrew.
Hebrew. Okay. This person says 6 stars, if I could. In the inaugural episode of Ad Nauseam, Dr. Noe and Dr. Winkle talked about the class as a way of life, as a way of finding enjoyment in those moments not consumed by work, family, and the responsibilities of each day. I look forward to the episodes to come for the knowledge I'll gain and the enjoyment I'll have.
Wow, that's really nice. We
Yeah.
are so grateful to you listeners for taking the time to do that. All right, so Jeff, next week we go back to the Odyssey for episode 26.
That's right. We got so much more to cover with that epic. And we're doing book 9, which is the big one.
The big one.
The Cyclops episode.
The big guy with his giant eye makes his appearance.
Yes.
So tune in for that. And you also have the gustatory parting quote, don't you?
I do. This week it comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who once said, "There are only 10 minutes in the life of a pear when it is perfect to eat."
Oh, so true. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.